Our conversation then continues. Our guest is already on set, Dr. Mukhisa Kituyi. You know, I don't like saying former. What are you doing now, Doc?
Well, I'm a citizen, a senior citizen.
A fixer.
Senior.
I've earned the right not to do very many things.
Yeah.
I agree.
That's an hero.
Kupumzika.
Yeah. You share your knowledge. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been a while, but you've been. I'm sure you've been busy. You've been busy doing very many things.
But I've also been busy avoiding media.
Which one?
Oh, then we're honored that you chose to not avoid us, but to come see us.
Thank you very much for honoring our invite. It's very good to have you. I'll start with a very off-the-cuff question.
Yeah.
You seem to have an interest in people, sociology, anthropology. What drew you to wanting to understand people like that? Were you always curious about human nature, the way we form communities, or did you find yourself there?
I never found myself anywhere academically by accident.
I love that.
I set out already from high school that I was going to play a public life.
Yes.
With a fairly early shade of wanting to go into political leadership. So you can't go into political leadership properly without paying attention to social issues, dynamics.
Agreed.
Yeah. Yeah. That's where it originated.
It's quite an interesting one. Now, because of that, because you have interest in all these things, there's something that Janet is going to do, which is just, trigger your memory a little bit with a quotable quote. We call her our wordist, right? She likes looking at quotable quotes, people who've said things, and whether those words that were said then still resonate today. Where are we today, Janet?
Where are we today? And just also off of what Mariam asked Dr. Kituyi is, I also have this fascination with the people behind the words, I think. So this person that we're focusing on today would be considered one of the greatest founding fathers of independent Africa. Let's think about one of the first and one of the greatest, and then let's think west of the continent. So I'll say the quote and then ask you whether you think you know who this person is. We face neither east nor west. We face forward. Who said that?
Osagefo Kwame Nkrumah.
Yes. I like the way he actually finished the quote with me. Right. Thank you. What do those words mean to you? Why was it so important for him to share that?
You know, those words reflect just an understanding of the dynamics of the moment. That Africa was birthed into independence in the foundation years of the Cold War. So a lot of the Western governments looked at emergent African leaderships from the spectacles, are they with us or they're with communists? And if they use that broad brush to label you a communist, then they did not condemn you. They killed you or found a way of getting some junior officers to overthrow your government. So Kwame Nkrumah was one of this first generation of post-independent African leadership who were part of the thinking of what had come from a Bandung conference in Indonesia 1955, the creation of the non-aligned movement. And basically what we were saying is we shop for the best in the West, shop for the best in the East for us to go forward. So we are no cerebral commitment to capitalism or communism, but to Africa's development.
But to Africa, putting Africa first. Fantastic analysis.
Those words have come into play recently as well in Africa. I mean, there's still another look at are we East, are we West, especially for Kenya. You served in the Mwai Kibaki cabinet, where then it is said that Kibaki was facing more east than west. Is that true?
No. Kibaki was as traditional a classic economist from the London School of Economics as we could get anywhere. He was in the mold of a social democrat. And to be social democrats are not facing west. They're just practicing pragmatic capitalism with a sense of responsibility to cushion the most vulnerable in society, having progressive social policy, but very, very stringent macroeconomic policies. Yeah.
Would you say the same of Uhuru or Ruto?
I wouldn't. I've tried to see where they have tried to go, but particularly your current president. I don't even think he knows what West and East is. he invents government on the go. So you could not put him into a specific box that this is his economic thinking. So you see a mix of things that you are promising people that you are going to give them a social net. You are promising that you are going to grow the economy from the most vulnerable, and you increase taxation for people at all levels in the midst of an economic recession. You know, so that is not fitting in any box in economic theory.
It's all over the place.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, we are where we are right now with the decisions that have been made by Donald Trump, president of the USA.
Right.
In his second term, he's come back and he said, make America great again. I repeat, make America great again. And this is what we're going to do. First, we're going to cut big government in America. And also, we are going to look at how America benefits from everything in the world. One of those key decisions has been that, freezing of work and aid by USAID. We have heard, and we have heard from many people, that it's impacting Kenya majorly. What have you heard?
Okay, first of all, Trump did not win an election on the promise of the radical things he's doing right now. He was in denial about Agenda 2025, which is implementing religiously. He won the election on two major grounds. One, cultural wars. We were against this diversity of gender identities. We are against the woke movement. We are against putting on thick gloves when dealing with ethnic minorities. Fight against migration. Immigrants, remember Haitians eating dogs and cats? Propaganda? That was one line, appealing to the best fear of white America. The other thing is that he promised that he will pull down the cost of living, that he will fight inflation, that Biden had presided over a terrible thing. That's propaganda, because if you look at it, inflation was lower by the end of Biden's period than it was at the end of Trump's period. But he had a good megaphone called Elon Musk and social media, so they trooped things and created those who are the illusions around which he won the election. But he has put them on the back burner, apart from the immigration question, and now going to the implementation of Agenda 2025, the disruptive agenda.
There's something you said about pragmatic capitalism.
Yes.
The place of aid in pragmatic capitalism, especially for Africa, is a question we've grappled with. There's the questions of why are we so dependent? What do we do? How do we get ourselves out of this hole that we've buried? But then there's also the here and the now, which is we're very much in need of this aid. In your view, how does Africa wean itself off the need for aid? Before we even go into the impact of the freezing and USAID stop work orders, etc., how do we wean ourselves off of aid and get to a place where we can be sustainable and we don't need to have USAID or someone else take care of antiretrovirals for our citizens, anti-malarials, etc.?
I have seen in the media recently so many people pushing that easy line, we should wean ourselves off aid, we should stand on our own feet. It's a good idea, but you cannot do it overnight. First, Africa is not uniformly dependent on aid.
True.
When Kibaki left the presidency, foreign funding for the Kenyan budget was down to 5% of budget. 5%. That's not aid dependency.
That's true.
Yeah, but then we have worked into a situation now where we expand our appetite beyond our means, and that means increasingly we depend on borrowing and begging. We're much more vulnerable to ripples in international sources of the aid support. The way to build away from aid dependency is first and foremost prioritize what are the areas of public interest we want to go into, and align most of your resources with those priority areas. So that if aid is coming in, you're not vulnerable because it's not on your priority areas. If you are a country like Kenya with a very substantial number of citizens dependent on antiretrovirals, you are vulnerable to malaria. You have areas that have predictable climatic challenges, whether it is drought or floods, and it is predictably going to happen at certain seasons in the year. You prioritize your limited public resources in mitigating those dangers. You don't expose yourself by living totally to donors. That way you become much more vulnerable when they get out. So these are the areas we have seen the efficient and very generous support of USAID in areas of malaria, of non-communicable disease, of HIV, and so on. So when they withdraw, it impacts us very seriously because we did not put a priority on financing those sectors ourselves. So that's one of the challenges. The other challenge is start growing capacity. You know what has been happening? If you look at what the USAID has done, some of our most brilliant citizens find comfort in working where your goals are clear, there's no political interference, there's no corruption culture in your workplace, and you can measure results of your work.
Right.
So what happens? They relocate from working for the Kenyan Public Service to work for a donor agency. And they're very efficient. USAID employs some of the best persons in Kenya.
True.
Now, one of the consequences that's not being talked about is when they say, okay, freeze expenditure, send people home. Some of our most brilliant development workers are now off the marketplace. And you have no capacity to absorb them in. Today, you have to pay a certain amount of money to be employed by public service. And they are not likely to be joining those troops to go and bribe to be paid by public service, where they're not even given a chance to work. So that is one of the areas, if the aid freeze continues, which is going to majorly impact our capacity and performance.
I agree. You said, you know what, our priorities are a place we need to start, let's get them straight, right? If we're not prioritizing, for example, healthcare, then we will be dependent on aid forever. But I sometimes get the sense, and I don't even think it's a sense, the fact that this aid money comes with some, I don't know what to call it.
T's and C's.
Yes, some T's and C's. And also it's very luring. Yes, big time. There's conditionalities, T's and C's and all of that. But there's also the fact that if we were to prioritize healthcare, for example, such that, you know, a much bigger chunk of our national budget is going into healthcare, etc., we're less aid dependent, then it's not as quote unquote sexy for us to prioritize like climate change or something that's not as immediate. It's very easy to ask for aid because you're saying, look at my HIV numbers, look at how many children are dying from malaria, which is, you know, easily preventable, easily treatable, and to get that aid money. In your opinion, is the reliance on aid sort of, you know, cyclical because we want to be dependent on it for some of the higher ups?
Nobody frowns on a free dollar. But having said that, it's not just about throwing money at a sector. Some of the most inefficient use of public resources in Kenya is in the health sector. KEMSA is a cathedral of corruption. So if you do not deal with the structural constraints and the leakages in health management and health financing, if USAID money had been given to the Minister of Health to administer, a lot of it would have gone into the pockets of the managers of the health ministry. So what we're talking about is very radical reform and absorption capacity of the institutions that manage health, and copy what those who have been carrying out health programs under USAID have been doing. So we've just frozen them off. They do their efficient things like in a greenhouse, and the others go through the management by largesse that has been bedeviling us for a long time. So it's not just a money issue. That's one. The second thing is, what conditions are we talking about? Support, for example, to disaster mitigation. I don't see any major conditionalities. There's always been this rhetoric about conditionalities. The conditionalities are macroeconomic support from, and even macroeconomic support from IMF, World Bank. That these are the conditions: you must reform this, you must become more liberal in this, you must stop using resources in these non-priority areas. But boots on the ground in programs like USAID support for drugs for people who are HIV positive. There isn't anything significant of the conditionalities that comes with that, except avoid the corruption that you have been using in other sectors of the health ministry.
I think, you know, my mind is racing. I was sharing with them that I've been somewhat affected, just like a project of mine, and I'm sitting here trying to hold different truths together. Number one, there's a bit of a reset that people have to have in their minds, because you're right, there is a dependency that becomes, for lack of a better word, I don't know if addictive is the term, but you become used to knowing, I can follow through with this program because this grant is supporting it. I don't really need to think through too much about diversifying how else I need to get that. So I'm almost thinking out loud and wanting to ask you, you've raised some really critical points about the fact that some of the most incredible minds are kind of now just standing there and how we absorb them. So I think I want to ask you, how do we push reset today in a very practical way, even though I know the parallel is to think through sustainably supporting these projects, because now the foreign aid may be gone, especially for those that are USAID dependent. What happens in parallel? What happens to people like myself? And I'm not the best example because it's a small project, but yes, granted, people have lost their jobs. Unfortunately, it's something we're grappling with. How do we push reset from the perspective of wanting to impact change, honestly, but also thinking through having to rethink, how do we shift these programs? How do we rethink confidence in funding from different sectors and industries? And then how do we, in parallel, begin to wean ourselves off complete dependence on foreign aid? Have I made sense? I've said many things. Like I said, I'm thinking out loud and speaking.
It's allowed to think aloud. I think it's a debate that's due. To me, the most immediate thing is the Kenya government must find 14 billion shillings to just sustain the minimal work on HIV and malaria initiatives. That is a public function, but that has been funded double that amount by USAID. But also, even before I move away from that, the departure of money from USAID is not only what directly is given to Kenya. Programs run in Kenya by World Health Organization, UN High Commission for Refugees, are going to be directly impacted. More than 50% of the funding for UNHCR comes from the US government. Already they are seeing red flags. They are going to downsize very dramatically. You are heading to a situation where Kenya government will have to find food for people in refugee camps in Kenya. You are used to seeing refugee camps as an opportunity for Kenyans to sell to a donor, to the UN, produce to be given. Now you are going to be called upon that you are not just going to be giving them IDs and voter cards, you are going to give them food as a host country. So these are some of the other hidden challenges we're facing. But having said that, yes, it is true that a lot of very good initiatives underway are going to be at least scaled down. Alternatively, looking for alternative sources of financing. Unfortunately, the best alternative sources of financing, which are mainly European donor resources, are being tied down to plugging the hole at a larger level. Europe is looking at increasing its financing for the initiative on Ukraine. Europe is looking to increase its financing as America kills UNRWA in the Palestinian lands, finding resources for supporting the displaced coming back in spite of the wishes and dreams of Trump into Gaza. Those resources are from the pot where you are going to look for additionality in order to mitigate the collapse of USAID funding into Kenya. So very substantially, you will have to scale back some of the largest presidential tours around the country with the armies of followers going to start campaigning for 2027 will have to be cut down to accommodate more urgent and more relevant things for 2025, for example.
Dr. So USAID has been touting itself, and that's how it says, it's aid from the American people. Where was it founded?
USAID is not an aid organization. It's an agency for international development. And the essence of USAID is an arm of American international relations. It's the PR arm of America, that you see vulnerabilities, you see people drowning, and helicopters are dropping bags of food written of help, donation, a gift from the people of the USA. That is soft power.
It is.
That it made America become the provider of 40% of global development assistance. But it also gave America an inordinate voice, moral authority, to say, we sanction you. You are wrong. It is a weapon for American foreign policy, but in a smart way, not the jet fighters and the troops, but it complements them. America found this a very effective weapon, first and foremost, in the Cold War period. That people who love America because it stands with them in hardship times, people who love America because they can see we make the difference between life and death, have a soft spot towards America and stop sending their children to study in Patrice Lumumba Institute in Moscow. They aspire to go to American universities. So it was part of that ideological struggle. And just the destruction of USAID is a major defeat of American moral leadership internationally.
But then, even because it was founded as the Agency for International Development, and
basically as a corporation, by the way, it's like international solidarity.
Yes. And the main thing, the the reason behind everything is just so that America can extend its influence globally. Using the support that we are giving you in everything, whether it's in governance, whether it's in health, where you need it, whether we see that there's catastrophe, then we come in and support you and run. Was it successful on that?
It has been very successful in making a lot of countries take the side of America in global competitions.
Okay.
You go to the UN, there's contentious issue, America is in one position and China is another. They remind you about their support to your centers in Kisumu. And we think it will not be a very bad idea for you to see the relevance of our support to you by also standing with us.
Okay.
That is the soft power.
So
it has helped influence aligning particularly developing countries with America's political aspirations and directions.
So it's a political tool.
It is a political
tool. In everything that USAID has been doing, is the agenda here is political influence and to have leverage over you.
I don't think that you can totally say that way, that one of the benefits of the aid program is leverage, is influence on your position. I mean, you cannot say that America was looking for a leverage on Kenya when they trebled USAID budget for Kenya over the last 20 years. There was no trebling of leverage over Kenya. So you can see that they get programs, you're doing the right thing, you are accountable for what you're using the resources for, and they find satisfaction that is part of the global agenda of the specific program. There is increased support, not commensurate to the political leverage they have with you.
Are you sure, Dr. Ali? Because, look, in the last 20 years, let's just look at that, and the reemergence and the resurgence of China as a global power. And, you know, China's then move towards also influencing the world, especially Africa, and then supported by Russia's Putin. Don't you think that then it would make sense for US to say, okay, so let's actually increase how much influence we have, how much visibility we have in this
But can I now put that in reverse order for you? Over the past 20 years, China has invested much more in Ethiopia than in Kenya. Why hasn't American support to Ethiopia grown more because of trying to forestall the growing influence of China than growing it in Kenya, where Chinese influence has not been growing as much?
Some political game may be afoot there. I don't know. I'm just saying.
I don't think it's
when I look at all these things, I'm saying.
I think those conspiracy theories can take us off the track about some of the realities. It is true that there's no such a thing as a free meal. America comes in because you align your policies with things that it supports. Not necessarily things that are benefiting America, but things that are consistent with what its vision of the world should be like. So it's soft power. It is not disruptive of what you will otherwise have done. You can't tell me that if America had not come here, would have found a more efficient way of dealing with HIV, with the malaria challenge, with climate-related action mitigation. Something could have come, but it's not in that level. And I don't think that the rise, particularly in Kenya, it's not the whole region, the rise of American support through USAID has not been commensurate with the threat of China competing with America in Kenya.
No. So then is the trade-off worth it perhaps in the long run to have control, sort of, so to say, of our agenda, etc., our, morals, and all of that? Is the trade-off worth it long term? Thinking,
I think we'll have done what Singapore did in its early years. When you get support and you see demonstrate capacity of how things are done, the most important thing is to domesticate similar management culture, priority setting culture, implementation culture, so that increasingly you are capable of doing things as if you are USAID funded, as a learning experience from USAID. Then you become less dependent on USAID. Then you even start telling USAID, this sector are doing fairly well. Do you want to consider realigning these resources to this other area which is equally important, but we have not yet built capacity? But we refuse to learn about the management culture, the discipline in the workplace, the professionalism, because they are doing it, then we can concentrate on other things that have better political sex appeal.
Too late to do that? It is a little bit too late.
It's never too late.
It's never too late.
But the transitional period is going to be fairly costly. Yeah, I mean, you are seeing a situation where finances are very tight. Priorities are wrong. I mean, I saw in the media about 129 billion shillings being raised domestically to do an expressway to Mombasa. Utter nonsense. Nonsense. It is not a priority at this time. we have to look at, don't overrate the local capital markets. Of course, even worse, and your media should have to start highlighting this, ask government to confirm that they have not promised private American investors money from NSSF as the local capital for the construction of an expressway to Mombasa. Resources that should be available for more serious challenges like the gap we are going to experience with the departure of USAID.
And the questioning that's needed. Two quick questions. One is whether there's risk of capital flight where international donors withdraw, not just USAID funds, but also private sector investments due to uncertainty. Do you see that as well?
Private capital has been flying out of Kenya already before USAID came. I mean, you have seen, because of the hostile investment climate in Kenya, multiplicity of taxes and red tape, a return of shadowy informal taxation, high cost of energy. Many investors are relocating from Kenya to Tanzania, manufacture under less hostile conditions, and export to Kenya duty-free because Kenya and Tanzania have no customs boundary between them. It's a phenomenon that's been happening. Even the president of Kenya was in Tanzania saying he celebrates Tanzania overtaking Kenya in exporting more to Kenya than importing. It's a reality. It's not starting today. It started with the East African industries. Colgate and others migrated to Egypt under the COMESA free trade area to manufacture what they were manufacturing in the industrial area Nairobi out of Egypt and export the finished product to Kenya. That's exporting jobs. It has been going on. It's just that those who man the political gate don't see the ramifications of that kind of phenomenon.
Is it that they don't see, or they...
If they see, they don't understand how significant it is. If they do, they don't care about what's important for the country.
Because I'm looking at all these decisions that have been made in America that could then have an impact, right, on us. We are seeing USAID, not just in health, but also in other areas, in other sectors of development. In Makueni, for example, water, in other counties as well, in agriculture, you know. So there are other areas where USAID has been coming in and doing some sort of support. But also beyond that, there's the freezing of, or the cut of funding to World Health Organization and the impact that would have. There's the walking away again from the climate treaty and the impact that could have with Kenya and the position that Kenya was taking in Africa in terms of just pushing the climate agenda. So how are all these likely to impact on us, particularly on our spending and our quality of service?
There will be a major need to re-rationalize priorities in public spending in the coming period, particularly in the health sector, a little bit in agriculture. Unfortunately, for localized county-based support programs, we do not see any short-term solution to that. Some of them may atrophy because of this change of conditions. But there is something about America's attitude to development cooperation that is now coming through that many do not appreciate. If America has decided that you mind your own stall, we are cutting costs, we are minding our own stall. And coming from a president who is saying, to make America great again, you must produce everything in America. What it means is the most important economic partnership between the US and Africa, the African Growth Opportunity Act, AGOA, is going to die. The current AGOA expires in 2025. And that just by Trump just turning its back on that, we lose $1 billion of Kenyan exports to the US market duty-free in the first year. And you know how many semi-skilled labor-intensive activities go on under AGOA in the export processing zones, in manufacturing under bond. Many people don't realize. I mean, I was telling someone, when Trump says that he's stopping aid to South Africa, and people look at the support for people living with AIDS, that is not the main thing. Under AGOA, South Africa exports close to $17 billion of manufactured produce into the US market. So that is the main sanction that will come through. It's not the little money for supporting the antiretroviral distribution. So there are so many multiplier effects. The ripple effect of Trumpism is much larger than how much has USAID been doing here.
Right.
Yeah.
It
So
goes
even
beyond
our
this.
own paradigm about how are we going to anchor our social development, our social security networks, has to be a totally new conversation.
Yeah, and even as we deliberate that, and as we continue to talk about the ripple effects of this stop work order and the freeze, what are your thoughts on what is working well in Kenya? What is the one thing in a certain sector that you feel is serving Kenyans and working well?
Working well or serving Kenyans?
Both.
Because working well
Working
is...
well,
Working well in serving
Yes.
Kenyans.
Working well and serving Kenyans.
All right,
Both.
because some of the things that are working well are not serving Kenyans. When I see some of these religions which are increasingly making people go to church every day of the week, they are working well, but they're not serving Kenya. They are withdrawing a critical labor resource from the market and promising them the life hereafter at the expense of local today production. But then what's working well and serving Kenyans are, importantly, a vibrant social media. Our ability to expose the king as naked is extremely important in raising a consciousness that we can deserve better. Our ability to hold government and those in governance to account because of what they do or what they fail to do. Our ability to relate messages given in one place where you are launching the foundation of a water project and in another place where you are launching a transformer. It is an important way of looking and saying, this is how your tax money is being spent. That informational phenomenon is extremely important for us making sound judgment on governance issues. Yeah.
I like that. The soft power you talked about earlier is something I want to touch on a little bit because people feel very differently about it. The removal and the stop work orders and the pulling out of USAID, quote unquote, means that as much as there were no set conditionalities in stone as far as soft powers, morals, agendas, whether it's LGBTQ rights, democracy, issues of, the rights of arrested persons, all those things. There was nothing solid, but there was a feeling that, that's part of the overall agenda. So some people are like, what, it's okay. It's time for us to now set our own agenda. What are our moral values as a nation? What do we think of ourselves? What is right for us? There's others that are like, without this, we could very easily spiral into something quite ugly without having, quote unquote, someone to inject that morality. And I'm using it very loosely because, it's a very big term, but I think you get my question. Which way are you leaning as far as the soft power? Is it a good thing that, there might be less of it with the withdrawal of USAID?
No, but it depends on social, soft power for what? Look, one of the main consequences of a sense of partnership and solidarity has been that the elite of this country aspire to take the children to an American or European education. You believe in the value of what they do in their countries, how they do it.
Right.
So that is a benefit that will outlast Trump. And many people are saying, this is a gust of hot air. Lie low, let it pass, particularly after the first 2 years when he loses control of Congress. The excesses will be railed in, and he will become a lame dark president, and there will be a fight back to regain support for critical programs. Because the American intelligentsia know that USAID is a great program. Some of their best brains have anchored their thinking about a world for all of us around the USAID program. And what it does, and America's soft power is not just about intimidating and blackmailing others, but that people share with you the values that you stand for. But when you start negating that solidarity, one of the first consequences is that non-democratic dictators emerging around the continent will be more brazen because there is no big brother to tell them you are abusing your rights, you are eating your own people. That there is no threat of withdrawing support if you behave badly, since the support has been withdrawn. So that is one of the consequences that we'll have to live with. But the open space, because of reduced soft power, can be abused by going the extreme opposite way. Homegrown dictatorship is less restrained because there's no big brother who's telling you behave the way you should.
But this big brother, do we really need one big brother to tell us things to do?
I wish the citizens were the big brother.
Is that, and that's
in
the
an
thing.
ideal world.
In an ideal world.
In an ideal world.
Probably this is what we should be advocating. Instead of advocating that we have one external big brother who's looking and lording over us and saying what we should do, is saying that internally we should be in charge of our own. We should also be strong enough so that we can be going to the neighbors and saying, you know what, guys, this is how we do things.
You know,
The African Union, to finish the point, the African Union, for example, should be the one who is our big brother in Africa, or the EAC in the region. Why do we need to have another country that does not understand our nuances?
I am not talking in the mode of America decreeing to you how you behave. I'm looking into an America where if human rights are abused, Gen Zs are arrested from the streets, they disappear, some of them turn up dead. That an America which says it's outrageous that a government that collects tax from the citizens can do this to its people. That is not now saying that we want America to be doing it for us. But I'm saying that when we have not built sufficient domestic capacity for outrage and restraining bad behavior because of our outrage at abuse of law by those in power, it doesn't hurt if an international solidarity supporter says the same thing that we are saying. You are going too far in these excesses. So that's all. I'm not justifying a big brother for us. Secondly, in Africa, there are countries which stand up and say this is unacceptable.
True.
Botswana has stood up in African fora to say you cannot condone African corruption and you speak about Africa's development.
Yep.
Yeah. So if we start growing those kind of models where we criminalize corruption, we criminalize ill-gotten wealth, we reduce the theater of public bribery as a way of legitimizing leadership, then we are the ones who are holding the big stick over those who appoint to be leaders.
Well, you say the same thing,
Right.
Dr. Harry. And actually what I'm pushing for here is that multilateralism in its true sense. Remember right now, actually, globally, the whole conversation of multilateralism and whether it is true multilateralism is at the peak. And it's a feeling that there are some powers that feel that they're so powerful that they are, lords, and they're overwatching everybody else. And the rest of the world is saying no. How about we then actually become true multilaterals?
I have been working a lot of my last 2 decades on the multilateral questions. I'll tell you this. We, the small countries, are strong believers in multilateralism, meaning that everybody's hand on board is important, that this is enough space for all of us. But multilateralism is being killed by America. Not just Trump, it started before. It's accelerated in the days of Obama. No, it started growing in the days of Obama. When China started coming close to competing and threatening to overtake the US in controlling global production.
Yeah.
And then its influence starts growing with its interventions on developing countries. So America, which helped to shape the multilateral system, a rules-based global trading system, has started pulling back. It has crippled the International Court for Dispute Resolution on Trade Issues and Investment in Geneva. It is slowly crippling the World Trade Organization. It is bringing the technology Cold War with China to all global competition areas. So multilateralism is under threat. But the small players have no capacity to say, because of our numbers, we want the multilateral system to work. It is the big boys who should say that the cost of competition and new Cold War is much higher than the cost of softening your stance through the multilateral system.
And what should the small ones do? What should the small boys do? Sit back and wait for the big boys?
No, the small boys do a lot in shaping concrete agenda at the multilateral process, like in the World Trade Organization, in setting the rules, in the dispute solution methods. They have been very, very big players, and some of the best players have been actually not very big countries. Singapore, Mauritius, India, and Australia have been punching way above their weight on the rule-making system. Yeah, that's an important phenomenon. But it's all going to waste when the technology Cold War starts overshadowing the rules-based system, trading system.
Time for that break, and as we go into the break again, let's look at what people are saying on our social medias. And thank you very much for all the fixers who are joining us online on Facebook, on YouTube, on TikTok, on X, and all the conversations that are taking place. It's debates and debates all everywhere, in terms of what people think about what we are seeing coming out of America and the impact it's having in Kenya. The next hour, we want to ask you to share your views and as well as your experience. Have you been working for an organization that has now been affected by these orders by Trump? Or what have you seen in your community that is likely to be impacted? People are always just thinking about health, but then we talked about other projects, agriculture, other development projects like water and energy and all. I mean, what does that mean and how should we move forward from this? Share your comments on your views on NTV, NTV Kenya on social media, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. X, YouTube as well. It's 8 a.m. Time for that break. Dr. Mukhisa Kituyi is our guest this morning. He is describing himself now as a senior citizen, somebody who is just sitting back and looking at what's happening and then saying, yeah, the way you're going, you could come out on a good thing, but this one, nah. He's been there, he's done that, he's our guest. Keep it here. Our guest this morning is Dr. Mukhisa Kituyi. We're talking about the impact of the US aid freeze and what it's going to have on Kenya. Not just the aid freeze, but also all the other decisions that are being made by President Donald Trump. As we do that, we are also tracking what's happening in the news today. Our news fix. Mariam, what's our first one?
An X-war. We've seen various over time we've seen various Twitter wars. Usually it's country versus country, you know, Kenya versus Nigeria. But recently, Elon Musk, who loves to use his own platform, went up against Julius Malema. Of course, if you're familiar with South African politics, the name Julius Malema is very familiar to you. And they went at each other with Malema saying, these people, when you want to hit them hard, go after a white man. They feel terrible pain because you have touched a white man. We are cutting the throat of whiteness. We will kill white women, children, and their pets. Now that statement, very inflammatory, caught a lot of people's eyes. Elon Musk immediately responded saying there will be sanctions for Malema and a declaration of him as an international criminal. Now, while that is an inflammatory statement, I don't know if it warrants international criminal. Malema responded with, I really think you've entirely lost your left brain. A typical spoiled brat, direct beneficiary of apartheid's whiteness. I know black people look the same to you. Typical racist. Look closer, you will realize those are two different people. America is exposing us to its stupidity. I don't care about your sanctions. I will never stop fighting for black people to be equal to white people. If that makes me an international criminal, I am proud to be one.
This whole conversation about land redistribution in South Africa and what it's bringing is taking a whole new tangent. And I'm actually at a point where I was looking at all these conversations yesterday and wondering, so for example, Elon is retweeting somebody who has gone and dug up something that Malema said
years ago,
and bringing it back up and using that and pushing. And of course, also influencing the president of the USA, who says, you know what, we're going to come up with sanctions on South Africa because of what you're doing. I'm wondering, what's this new tangent? I mean, Doc, maybe you understand this. What's going on?
Well, a number of things. The inordinate power that's at the disposal of Elon Musk, an unrepentant racist. I mean, he's an apartheid baby. Who ran away with his Canadian mother to Canada and then found his way into the US, but he has remained a white racist. But his inordinate power, who is he to declare that you are an international criminal? At the same time that America is trying to kill the international criminal court.
Yes.
It's narrow, but there's a phenomenon that it plays well to Trump's racist sentiment when you say some blacks are throwing white people off their farms. You saw that he announced that he wants to welcome South African white refugees.
Yes, we saw that.
Can he welcome South African black refugees as well? He will not. If you're black, you go in without papers,
head back home.
He handcuffs you and flies you on a military plane back home. That you will see some of your own will start arriving in a similar way.
But why now?
And even see what he did now to Norway. There's a small band of 49 people who are flown back to who are being sent back to Norway, and because they're illegally in the US. They are 100% Somalis, and there's no white one that is being started. So it's just a phenomenon. What Malema is doing is he's baiting, he's trolling Musk, and Musk is swallowing the hook. And then in the process, it exposes the racist that Musk is.
South Africa,
that the world forgets.
Every so often, there's racial discourse flare-ups that happen in South Africa. I remember being in South Africa when there was another major conversation that happened in a news studio, much like ours, and it was a conversation about, again, it comes up to race, it comes up to equality, and it went into almost like a fist fight, right? Because it's such a sensitive topic that it's like a landmine. You might be moving through the motions of everyday South Africa, but there's always a landmine, and in this case, the landmine was, there was the death of a very well-known apartheid leader, revered. And apartheid and revered does not augur well for people who are black or colored. And this journalist was saying, you know, why should we be honoring this person who was so divisive in our history? And it escalated. And in the end, this person said, you will always revere us. And you know what we're seeing now? It is this recurrence. It's not the last time we'll see it.
Right. What I love about South Africans is, and this even goes to their stance, taking Israel to the International Criminal Court, etc. At least making sure that they are at the forefront of fighting what they see as a new age form of apartheid, is that they are consistent with who they are, regardless of the platform, regardless of the international community's feeling towards it. Even from a pop culture perspective, America loves to see the world through its lens, and when you do anything different, it becomes a big issue. So when an artist called Tyler refers to herself as colored, Americans are in shambles. Why would you call yourself colored? We don't say that anymore. And the rest of the world is like, you don't say that anymore. There are places where that's acceptable. So for Malema, I think he does not feel any form of being threatened or, you know, being shaken. Being called an international criminal is non-consequential, because the party calling you an international criminal is coming from a country that is not, you know, following.
He's having it.
Yeah, it's not having it.
But there's something I just want to mention about that. You see, South Africa's international relations has been value-based. When South Africa took Israel to the International Court of Justice over the genocide in Gaza, it was consistent with the positions they have held as ANC since the days of Mandela. When Kenya became the first and only African country to back Israel in its invasion of Gaza, you could not say that that was in any way organically related to the thinking and the feelings of Kenyans. So there's a disjoinder between utterances by leaders who just impromptu try to please certain constituencies, and those who are prosecuting a consistent line for themselves. But having said that, internally, South Africa has not been able to deal with the question of social justice post-apartheid. Still, whites own 80% of the most fertile land in South Africa, in spite of the promise of change. The law that Trump is referring to does exist, that the state has authority to take, with or without compensation, certain lands from groups that own them if it is so desirous and necessary for social good. But they have not evicted anybody. Now, to inflame passions by attacking them and abusing them, they can just play by the law and start doing a Mugabe.
What else is also, we are following up on news, is that 9 a.m. today at the Bomas of Kenya, the ODM Nairobi leadership is going to be congregating to pray, a special prayer service to pray for Raila Amolo Odinga as he heads to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, for the election of the chairperson of the African Union Commission. That's due to take place this Saturday, okay? Who are the other candidates? We've got the Djibouti candidate, Mahmoud Ali Yusuf, and then you have Richard. The Madagascans have very nice long names.
They do.
Randriamandrato.
We had Ravalo Manana for
Imagine
the
as
longest time.
president, right?
Mr. DJ.
So Randriamandrato is the candidate from Madagascar, Richard Randriamandrato, and Mahmoud Ali Yusuf from Djibouti. The elections take place this weekend. The ODM leadership in Nairobi is saying, let's meet. Tumweke mbele za Mungu, tumkabidhi mikononi mwa Bwana, ili Bwana atakapoenda pale, Bwana awe naye na what do you think?
What do I think? Okay, I mean, I wish Raila well. He's in an uphill battle, and I've said that before, but I wish him real well. That, you know, a Christian prayer service might win if there's some votes still to be won from Christian believers. but does not necessarily increase your chance of winning the Muslim vote at the elections.
Do you think Kenya has mounted a good campaign for Raila across Africa?
That is not terra firma for me. I have not been following closely the dynamics of this campaign. I know that substantial resources have been used. We have tried to campaign even in areas where have not been very welcome to do so. But it's not up to me to say whether it was a good campaign or not. The dynamics of electing leadership for Africa Union are not always in sync with good campaigning. That's why there's only been one non-Muslim leader of Africa Union, the lady from South Africa. You can't say that Francophone Africa campaign is better. The other dynamics are beyond the energies and resourcing of campaigns by the countries sponsoring candidates.
What's at play?
There are many different things. One, I've been told, I've promised otherwise, but traditionally, and I've seen this in the UN system where I worked for 8 years, Francophone Africa votes as a bloc when there's an election. And it's extremely difficult normally for Francophone Africa to vote as a bloc for a non-Francophone speaker if and when there's a Francophone speaker, French speaker among the candidates.
Right.
That's an important dynamic. Number two, there's a very large constituency of Muslim states or Muslim majority states on this continent. They did not take it very kindly when the president of Kenya rushed to stand behind Israel on its unjustifiable genocide in Gaza. That doesn't sit well. That means that the Ruto does not become an asset if you're going to look for votes in Arabic Muslim countries in Africa.
There's more liability in that case.
Yes. And the main alternative to Raila is a Muslim who speaks French.
Yeah.
So those are important considerations. Number three, the Anglophone vote has been split. You remember SADC, which has a candidate from Madagascar, has apparently thrown its weight behind the candidate from Djibouti. And when Ramaphosa makes that statement, he's speaking for more than South Africa. So there are so many dynamics. To roll back these gains by the Djibouti candidate is a tall order. I know that Baba has done his best. I don't know how well it will work.
So going back to our conversation this morning, which is, when America freezes aid and the impact that that's going to have to Kenya. And that's why we have Dr. Mukhisa Kituyi with us, because his experience on matters of, international relations and multilateralism, like you've said, working at the UN for those 8 years, and what you have observed in terms of international politics at play, diplomacy at play, and the economic power of the economic powerhouses, and how then it impacts those countries. People have been watching and wondering, okay, so a few people are going to lose their jobs. How many people are losing jobs? I mean, companies are closing. Our health sector, that just exposes how our government has been behaving. And you even told us in the last hour, 15 billion shillings is needed immediately to at least try and close a bit of that hole, the gaping hole that's been left. But do we see us having the capacity to actually do it? Do we have anywhere leeway to get 15 billion shillings, 14 billion shillings, or even increase it to 30 billion shillings to cover the gap that's just been left on health alone?
It depends on how much priority President Ruto gives to the gap that is being created by the holding back of resources from USAID. If he does, there's sufficient reason even to have supplementary estimates presented before Parliament for appropriating resources, aligning with the primary health requirements for continuing some of the most critical work that has been going on under the support of USAID. So to me, 15 billion shillings is not really mountain if you look at the important work that was being done, particularly in health issues.
Right. Goes back to what you said about prioritization. I've got an interesting take from Ken Kagai on X, who says, all the areas we received aid in were not anchored in local policies. Much of the pain we will feel is in policy making.
I do not totally agree. Kenya's work under PEFA supported by PEPFAR program, Kenya's work on HIV, this provision of antiretrovirals, Kenya's work on malaria, Kenya's work on communicable and non-communicable disease control, even our own centers of communicable disease. These are anchored in our national health policy priorities. It's just that a donor offered to take a chunk of financing and management of an area that is important in our policy. It's not an externality. It is not created because America brought the money to do it. It was there, but America thought it was important enough and consistent with its own thinking and said, we will support you in doing what you wanted to do. Our mistake is that then we went on holiday about doing that.
I was about to ask that because, yes, clearly the policy is there, and we've said this on this show many times. It's a fact for Kenya. The policy, the laws will be wonderful on paper. The execution is where we go a little bit wrong. But when did the rain start beating us, quote unquote? When did we switch off mentally and decide, now that this aid is coming and it seems to be coming, then there's no reason for our national budget to align with our policies as far as, HIV is concerned? And when did we, take our foot off the gas and just relax? USAID is there, we're good.
When the U.S. support started in the dying years of Clinton's administration, it increased under
George W.
Bush, doubled under Obama, and has now tripled by the end of Biden's period. We saw that this looks to be a sustainable source of resourcing. That's why it started having gravitas in attracting some of our best managers, implementers, thinkers, researchers, because it looked like sustainable funding. We did not know that the disruptive Trump administration was coming. We never saw it coming. And if we've been caught with our pants down, pardon the imagery, we are not alone. Even the international community, including the best friends of America, did not see it coming.
But I think for us, we saw it coming. In terms of the conversation about PEPFAR and starting to scale back on the level of support that it's offering, especially to HIV and communicable diseases sector, was there. It was a program, it was coming to an end. The PEPFAR program was coming to an end in terms of now scaling back and saying, so we've been offering this kind of support, let's start reducing. These conversations have been had at government level and saying, so how do we then cover that? Remember a couple of years ago, just around the COVID period, and there was this whole conversation about our World Bank and our Kenya National Blood Transfusion Service not having the support. Why? Because, well, among the things that we are saying is we are going to reduce some of this support. So it's not that we were caught pants down.
Okay, just a qualification. America was not winding down PEPFAR support. It was scaling back.
Yes.
And part of that was not because it was reducing its support to Kenya. It was increasing the amount of money it was putting in Kenya. Just that disaster mitigation, climate action support increased to be 40% of the financing, which was the percentage that belonged to health support. And this declined to 30%. What you should have said, which is correct, is that as the change in priorities shifted towards climate action and disaster management away from health support, we should have started already reading the science and building out our own capacity. Now, it's just an imperative. It has come overnight. We have to deal with it, apart, of course, from also dealing with disaster management and mitigation.
And climate.
And climate action.
And I think it's interesting you've raised that point. And this is not to discount the importance of looking at supporting matters, climate and the like. But with the development world, what happens is sometimes you have to completely shift your initial priority because of where the funding is coming. And I feel like in many ways that's harmful. Like I'm saying, it's, for example, health. Issues to do with economic empowerment or access to healthcare. And then you find a point where there's these big meetings and somebody says, right, so over the next few years, we need to prioritize climate justice funding. And so they say, we're open. Please submit your grant applications. And if you don't have anything like that, even the work you could have been doing for 10 years is discounted because it's not a priority area. Should all this begin to allow us to rethink and reset what our priorities are? Again, I'm not saying climate isn't. I think climate is integrated in every facet of life, environmental issues. But do you think this is an opportunity to also rethink some of the priorities which were already gaining momentum and were in many ways sidetracked because of this new kind of like call to action for funding applications, specifically for climate action programs?
You know, When I was in Minister in Mwai Kibaki's government, one of our most important achievements was building the National Economic and Social Council, around which we developed Agenda 2030, which you lock in national development priorities beyond the tenure of any president. One of the mistakes that Uhuru Kenyatta made was to kill the National Economic and Social Council and basically scuttle Agenda 2030. That's why you can now be complaining about non-resourcing for primary health care, and Ruto is obsessed with building
affordable housing.
What he calls affordable houses. Affordable in terms of the benefit to those who supply materials.
Yeah.
That is totally irrelevant, but it is political promise. Right. Creating a hustler fund and all these bottomless pits. If we went back to saying our national priorities go beyond the tenure of an individual president, then we'll lock in some work on health, some work on climate change mitigation and disaster management beyond dependence on the donor. So when you have donor resources, we know that for the time being it is there. It saves us these other resources we can build on other levers. But the moment it disappears, we give this the priority it deserves in our national medium-term development program.
How do we anchor, for example, some of these things beyond the tenure of a president, like you've said?
Agenda 2030 was beyond
Vision 2030.
While keeping
Vision 2030 is the agenda was part of realizing the vision.
Right. While keeping accountability, because a lot of the times people will come and a new administration will come and say that was a bottomless pit of corruption. Taxpayer funds were sinking into Project XY. We can't continue with that. But I've got this new one. We're going to do an airport in the sky, whatever it may be, right? So then how do we anchor these things, for example, through Agenda 2030, while keeping accountability still at top of mind?
You see, to derail Vision 2030, the National Economic and Social Council had to be scuttled. And the Secretariat of the Vision 2030 had to be diluted.
Yep.
Then you could start coming up with very spurious dreams and delusions. Unfortunately, we let it happen as a nation. We did not give sufficient political protection to our medium-term development agenda, which was a consensus agenda. When it was developed, it was not owned by the government of the day. It was discussed and embraced by different sectors of the economy. Unfortunately, we learned the hard way. It's not too late to start locking in national priorities again beyond the campaign promises and flimsy dreams of individual political leaders.
There's a question that I've asked the previous chairpersons of the Vision 2030 board and even the CEO. Should we, looking back, should we have anchored Vision 2030 into proper legal instruments?
With the benefit of hindsight, I think we should have done that. We should have ring-fenced and protected it from being raided politically. We did not do enough of that. But I think the next phase has to be working in that direction. What are sanctified national priorities that should not be derailed by short-term political competition?
Is there anything, sorry, Jasmine.
No.
Is there anything happening at present right now that you think even slightly aligns with Vision 2030?
It might be happening, but I have not yet seen it.
Hasn't come to the radar. Some quick feedback here. Star Kenya on YouTube, who's engaging quite a bit in this conversation and pushing back a bit, saying some of our best thinkers, etc. How many are these? Can Dr. Kituyi give absolutes? Because USAID and UN is drowned in nepotism, cronyism, etc. And last I checked, Kenya has capable, unemployed talent out there. She also says, the answer is a categorical yes. We can plug the hole easily because only 1% of the amount you mentioned trickled to the people. So pushing back kind of on the fact that I think in a sense, Star saying, no, I think there's easy solutions out of this, and I think there's a way that we can cap it, and that it's not an absolute that the best brains, so to speak, the best people are employed by USAID and UN. I think there's still so much more talent out there. Fair context to raise, but I think also, to Dr. Kituyi's point, it's saying, yes, we're not saying all of them are, we're just saying a large number of the most brilliant people are employed by USAID. So just giving some feedback there from Star Kenya.
That number there, only 1% trickles down. I doubt that. But I think to his point is that there's still the questions of corruption around, you know, the funding that was received everywhere. So yeah, how much of that was getting to the people? And do we really need to plug a 30 billion shilling deficit, or could it be a lot less?
No, but also it's important that this obsession with trickle to the people as a measure of the importance of something.
We need to stop it?
We have outgrown it.
Why? How?
You cannot measure the value of investment in defense preparedness by how much of it trickles down to the people.
Why not?
No. Defense, you don't measure by how much goes to the population.
You measure it by?
It is how much security and forestalling of potential danger has been built into the system. That's building defense capacity.
That's one.
It's not quantified by what it costs people. Similarly, support in health. If you are supporting Centers for Communicable Disease Research, if you are supporting the antiretrovirals, there are 180,000 Kenyans who collect antiretroviral medicines every month. You do not quantify its effectiveness by how much of it trickles to the people. That's language is popular, but it's not a universal measure. You can use it for measuring food distribution for the poor or the vulnerable. That's why you quantify trickling to the people. But not everything is measured in its worth by how much it trickles to the people.
I guess the point
Similarly, on the question of our best brains, I mean, USAID is a small organization in Kenya relative to the population of the intelligence of Kenya. So even I did not pretend to say that our best are all employed by the UN system. I just say that some of the people that they have employed in their programs are some of our best. Yeah, and it does not defeat the fact that a lot of other good Kenyans are out there, both in the country and out of the country. And I know a lot of very good Kenyans who are doing very good work internationally, even within the United States.
So both those arguments go hand in hand.
They are not opposing arguments.
Let's take a break, but as we go into this break, we also want to open the phone line 0719 038 858. That's 0719 038 858. Call us and let's join this conversation, join this debate, and let's open it up. And all of us fixing the nation. So how do we sort out ourselves out? How do we look at all these things going forward? There's, like Dr. Mukhisa Kituyi said, AGOA expires this year. Trump's first term, there started a conversation about starting a new trade pact with Kenya. Biden comes in and says, forget about Trump's. I'm going to start mine. They come up towards the end of Trump's presidency. It's not signed. So is Trump coming back to say, forget about that one. Let's revisit mine. In the meantime, what happens to all the people who are employed in our EPZ? What happens to the potential of everything that we export out of Kenya into America? Do you know what? First of all, one of the biggest things that products that's exported from Kenya, apart from textile.
Oh, I was just going to say textile.
Second, anything else? Guess. Janet, guess.
From EPZ specifically?
No, from Kenya.
Or in general?
Yeah.
Agricultural produce?
Yes.
Yeah.
What?
Tea.
Something else? Coffee. Horticulture.
Flowers, yeah.
We're the largest exporter of horticulture into the European market.
Yep. In America, Kenya's largest agricultural produce is
coffee.
Nuts.
Is nuts.
Can you imagine? Nuts is a big one. So as we take this break, let's engage in that debate. But let's go into the break with three people who have commented on this issue. One, former President Uhuru Kenyatta. Second, Foreign Affairs Cabinet Secretary, Prime Cabinet Secretary Musalia Mudavadi. And third, the Archbishop of the Anglican Church of Kenya, Archbishop Ole Sapit. Let's take a look at what they've said about these developments.
I saw some people the other day crying, I don't know, Trump has removed money. He said he's not giving us any more money. Watu wanalia. Why are you crying? It's not your government, it's not your country. He has no reason to give you anything. I mean, Hey, you don't pay taxes in America. He's appealing to his people. Shauri yenu bwana.
The USAID supports to the tune of about 60%, and the Kenyan government to the tune of 40%. One of the first things we want to do as Kenya is to appeal to the United States that do not, this is one of the areas where there should be waiver so that the humanitarian aspect of support to the needy is not curtailed.
Indeed, and one of the things that we're saying is we've seen the reaction by former President Uhuru Kenyatta. We've seen, what Cabinet Secretary for Foreign Affairs, Musalia Mudavadi, has said. And there's also some comment that also came in from Jackson Ole Sapit, who's the Archbishop of the Anglican Church of Kenya. Here's what he said.
Actually, thank Trump for the disruption. Let us be disrupted so that we think properly and manage our resources properly. Every other economy grew, not in easy times, but when they were faced by a crisis, they think deeper. And I hope we can think deeper now.
Dr. Kituyi, what the Right Reverend Ole Sapit is saying here is, the disruption is good because it forces us to start thinking and to taking action. Do you agree?
Broadly as a principle, yes, a crisis invites heroism. At times of challenge, heroes are born in times of challenge. And the challenge before us is a reason for us to think again. Have we been too complacent about some things that are very important to the country? Yes, we've been. Is there any way we can now go through this pain but come out stronger? Yes, that's our responsibility. So broadly, I agree with him. But it doesn't take away the fact that it is a crisis.
It's a painful one. It's a crisis.
It's a painful crisis. It's a challenge. Can we surmount it? Yes. If we think right, we align resources, we curb wastefulness, we stigmatize corruption that will eat away any new resources you throw into a bottomless pit.
There's something that our leaders in this country are always afraid of declaring something a crisis. Right? Just coming out and say, this is a crisis. It seems like they feel this is, an indictment on their capacity, on their leadership. The governor of Makueni County went out publicly last week and said, what's happened here? This is a crisis. I'm having to figure out how to support a program that was supporting my people in Makueni, not just this one. Even in some of those faith-based organizations and facilities, USAID was supporting some health workers in those areas. And now they've been told to stop. What that means is that people are going to hospital today, and where they were previously finding a health worker, that health worker is absent. That's a crisis.
I've had the privilege to visit some of the USAID supported programs in Makueni. Perhaps the best technical training facility for physically challenged Kenyans. The support of one of the best youth ICT training program at county level in the whole country. And then the support of irrigation works that have put food on the table, and on the table of vulnerable women in some arid areas of Makueni. So I can understand.
So you know some Kambaya.
Yes, I've seen how particularly Professor Kivuta Kibwana had been able to attract USAID support for activity in that county.
So should this be declared a crisis?
I'm glad that the governor of Makueni has seen that this is a crisis, and he has to think about how we will reduce the pain. He cannot take all of it away, but how we can mitigate the pain that is coming with the turning off the taps.
So I'm elevating this because the Deputy President, Professor Kithure Kindiki, the Office of the Deputy President is the one that deals with coordinating development partners, right? So this is one critical development partner that is off the table suddenly, and a gap is exposed, right? What should Professor Kithure Kindiki do now?
What Archbishop Sapiti just said, Kindiki should be at the center of government reconfiguring its priorities and say what are the most important services we had taken our eye off because of the presence of USAID.
Right.
Apart from appeals that you consider these humanitarian and assistance, like Prime Cabinet Secretary is saying, government at that high level must start putting its money where its mouth is. that if this is a serious matter, we are going to sacrifice certain things. We are going to stop the unnecessary and ugly changes at State House, save that money, maybe a little, but it's part of the steps towards mitigating this challenge to us.
All right. There's on Twitter some very good feedback from Omore Siosendo, who says, good points and interventions from Dr. Kituyi. Of course, he's lauding your experience in foreign policy, etc. But he says something that gets lost in the noise of USAID funds is that the program fees, or is that there's a proposal to merge it into the US State Department. Canada, Australia, Denmark, and recently the UK all took this approach in combining their foreign development and sometimes their defense policies and programs into one. The difference is that these countries allowed the programs to end, of course, naturally putting together transition teams, as opposed to now this, stop work order being very, very sudden. So while many are celebrating the opportunity for Kenya to be self-sufficient, the impact that USAID's sudden exit will have on livelihoods and emergency programs will be felt very soon. Our public health sector, for example, and other things. And he's basically saying, let's see if the US Senate or the US courts will salvage the process. Do you think that that's a possibility as it stands right now?
Most European countries which had stand-alone ministries or agencies for international cooperation, like CEDA, like NORAD, like DANIDA, have seen a transition mostly inspired by right-wing politics in their own countries of integrating the development aid program into the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And what usually comes as the next step is to start reducing the budget for development support and start increasing the budget for supporting investors from their countries into the developing countries that will trade up with you by supporting your enterprise. But that's very different from a program that targets the most vulnerable in society. The Secretary of State in the US is not exactly a friend of developing countries. If you listen to what he talks, you cannot see him saying, now we are going to be able to build this up. But the problem that you have in America is everybody is second-guessing Trump. Even his closest allies, they do not know exactly what he is using to tease what will be changed and what will continue. So they will say one thing today and then they read his lips the next day and say the direct opposite if that's what he'll be saying. So we don't know how much they can influence his thinking unless you are part of that core team that is driving Agenda 2025.
We're in a lot of unknown territory. I like to normally bring this home to people who are directly affected. I know that we've talked about the beneficiaries. That's completely unfortunate. The patients that were relying on this medication or relying on the nurse. But I also want to talk to, say, the person who was running a small project and is now finding themselves in a place where they need to rethink and shift. How does that person begin to empower or to use the networks available to them? Or what networks can they turn to say to themselves, you know what, I was running this project and I felt like it was making headway. Unfortunately, I have to redirect, reshift, shut it down. What kind of mindset do they need to have, and where can they turn to? Where can they turn to research and think and say, if this project was helping people with elements of sanitation, access to sanitation, and I don't want to give up and I don't want to stop it just because USAID has decided to do a stop work order, what would you tell that person right now?
There's no size that fits every case. But you see, there's a difference between a program which was thought out and was being built, and then USAID came in and started supporting it, which means you improved scale because of the new resources, but that you can reduce scale and continue according to your means without that support. And there are programs which are good, are doing a lot of good, but they were created because USAID is available to fund them. Those ones are a totally different category, and I couldn't give them much advice.
Interesting.
There's the other angle of just getting Kenyans to start thinking of supporting projects. Just like we say, thinking of supporting political parties. Do Kenyans actually do harambes for projects that are long-term, or do we do harambes for solutions that are immediate? We're very good at solutions, at harambes. We contribute harambes for funeral, for medical aid, for school fees, but they are all short-term, immediate needs. How can we start maybe shifting our mind into thinking, how do I support a program that was working in my community, that was supporting, or that is supporting members of my community and I am able to chip in 10 bob, 100 shillings that goes towards keeping this program running.
You know, if you go to the villages, the past 1 year I've spent quite a bit more time in my home area than I've done over the last 40 years. And you see a lot of the peasants and young men and women in the village. They are doing these things every day. They are raising money for people to get into hospital, to buy some drugs. They are raising money to take care of local vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
Now, you cannot write this large as a national responsibility that we fix health centers through Harambee unless it is tax deductible. You are paying tax because you expect the tax to do that work. You don't pay tax. The tax buys fuel guzzlers for politicians, and you go and fix what your tax was supposed to fix. So that's one thing. So to me, to start turning into philanthropy into a driver of development is a wrong thinking. It's just that can our taxes, in an accountable way, be shown to be doing what they were collected for?
Those are two things, and I agree. I completely agree that we should not be subsidizing the government because we are already paying taxes to support the government, okay? But we already do that, Dr.
Yeah, I know.
Like all those things that are happening in the village, when we are subsidizing by, supporting a vulnerable child to go to school or
hospital
bills, or even contribute towards funerals, or all those other things that we do, what we are doing is basically subsidizing the government. But then there's the other side of supporting causes that then are able to hold the government to account. We have local CBOs that are trying to hold the government to account, the county government to account. But those local CBOs are supported by USAID and others, okay? That funding could and may freeze, we have seen.
Yes.
We have national NGOs that are trying to do that as well, just raising and mobilizing communities to come together so that we stop, in the long run, subsidizing the government. They are donor funded. Yeah. My point is, can we see a way of saying, I need an institution in my community that is doing just the number work for the budget and coming and creating awareness for me on what the budget implications are and asking my voice, and I'm supporting it so that it's representing me from that community level.
Yeah, I mean, that's a totally different phenomenon, and I totally agree. There are already some people and institutions which support public cause initiatives, whether it is lobby groups, CBOs, organizations against gender-based violence, and that is something right to do. I know a lot of people are already doing that, and I think there could be benefit and a lot more contributing to that than the jamboree of Harambes that we do for political goals. Yeah, so that is right. But not for the co-financing of long-term developmental work, which I think is the responsibility of the exchequer.
My first fear would be if we do it and we do it well, we'll end up in this exact same situation. So we'll become dependent on internal aid, quote unquote. So it's crowd-funded healthcare, which to a certain extent we're already there. Crowd-funded education, crowd-funded everything. So I think to Daktari's point, it needs to be not the burden of the exchequer, but the work, and it is taxpayer money. The accountability question will always just be lingering, but perhaps as we begin to wrap up the conversation, forward-facing now, we are where we are at. The job losses, the effects as far as our healthcare are concerned are going to be felt immensely. Are there any immediate stopgaps? And I know you've talked about, prioritizing healthcare, etc., in our budget, but immediate stopgaps that we could do to help perhaps, fill that gap left by USAID and any other thing that might happen as a result of Trump's many, signings.
I think the most important ones are the government has contingent funds all the time. Some of those contingent funds, which have been used for other things, can now be aligned with the short-term financing, but also supplementary estimates realign some of the resources in the development sector to start filling the gap that is created. The minimum requirement of 15 billion shillings, for example, in the financial year, that should be done. Similarly, bring forward some of the the budgeted resources for the follow-up period to the immediate period now, while waiting for any possible remobilization of resources, both domestic and donor, to bridge the gap that is created by this.
I like that.
So this calls for a supplementary budget.
I think so.
Right? And the supplementary budget, well, we are due a supplementary budget, even the CS for the National Treasury told us. So this should be the focus now into how do we rearrange our resources and go to Parliament and say we'd like to play around with the numbers here and allocate more money towards these areas. The fear and question would be, is it going to national government alone, or is it also to be redistributed to devolution and devolved functions? Because there's always this argument, for example, when it comes to health. Why does the Ministry of Health have a budget of over 200 billion shillings when all of counties have a proper full budget of 400 billion shillings? You know?
Well, those are legitimate questions to be asked, but to rationalize the disbursement method, because some of the support of USAID has been working with devolved government and some with the national government. So this should be also the basis of distributing any new resources, because of the different components that belong to devolved units and but belong to the national government. But of course, the questions of rationalizing resourcing and management of public finances in the health sector has now a new impetus to be raised. There is a laguna in the distribution of resources between national and county government, between Kenya Medical Supply Stores and the direct procurement that's done elsewhere. It's about time to start asking that, even as we look for gap, closing the gap in the financing caused by this challenge.
I'm trying so hard not to be jaded. It's an opportunity for sure. I like how Greg Ogola says, look, this may look like something bad at first, but we have an opportunity to step up and be more independent. When USA made it difficult for China to require certain technology for development of AI, what happened? And I just say that not...
They developed their own?
They've developed their own. I think we have some of the best ideas. Dr. Mukhisa Kituyi has also answered some questions. I just panic about the political will, about the intentionality, and the fact that the government
of Kenya.
Do you live abroad?
No, he asked a fair question.
Is she talking about Trump or?
No, fair question. And yes, that's fair.
Our Trump.
Our Trump. Oh, wow.
What's your fear, Janet?
I think just like everything else, the fear is whether there's going to be, you have a governor seeing it as a crisis, but we haven't quite heard it at the national level that it's a crisis. And as long as it's not recognized as such, we don't know how we'll be cushioned. People don't know what happens next, because where is the will to say, you know what, we need to step up and ramp certain things up.
I want to talk to that. What's the problem with government? While I was in the village, I saw the president of Kenya visit my neighborhood twice. He came with a team with about 5 helicopters, and more than 50 cars preceded him and were on the ground with ministers and other government officers. The first occasion, the president was presenting computers to our technical training institute. The second trip, he was laying the foundation stone for a primary school being built by Safaricom Foundation. This is true. You spend more money than the value of the project, which project you are not financing to come there. The demonstrated largesse and waste of public resources shows that there is a lot of usable resources that is going to waste because of political ego. And we have to call the president to order. If the rest of us are concerned about what his government should do, he should stop wasteful, irrelevant trips where he goes to launch water projects where they have just built a trough, or he goes to launch a
what's the name of the school that he was
Naitiri Primary School, funded by Safaricom Foundation. Ruto went to lay foundation stone.
Do you think the people of Naitiri saw that as largesse?
When I came back, they said, this man is a joke. Villagers were saying, this man is a joke. What did he bring us? This school is brought by Safaricom. And he flies in by chopper to come and lay a foundation stone. It's just like commissioning an electricity transformer. I mean, we're not so stupid as not to see this waste of public resources. And we cannot sit here, pretend that we can put this to one side and complain about challenges of financing programs that have been supported by the USAID. Ruto should lead by example.
So,
be the first one to show fidelity to the new challenge. Cut back on the largesse, on the wasteful trips he's making, and put those resources in the gap that has been created.
So the citizens can see it. The citizens are seeing what is missing as a gap, right?
Yeah.
And the citizens are speaking.
Yes, sir. You saw them speaking in Isiolo.
How do you make the voice of the citizens then matter? How can we fix this so that as people see, as people comment, on the ground and say, we don't like this, we don't like the other, how do we make those voices matter?
I wish they could matter long before the next election. My problem is that when Ruto hears people not happy with the way he's running or mismanaging public affairs, his solution is to try to invest in alternative ways of being ready for the next election. He's not talking to the issues that are concerning people by putting committed resources to the projects you so loudly announce. How now the public intelligence converts the public outrage and public anxiety into positives in the budgetary allocation of resources and things will require an acceptable parliament. But this song and praise that we hear from parliament is not part of the solution. I mean, Adan is bad, everyone says Adan is bad. America forces Ruto to say Adan is not good. They all stand around, thank you very much for telling us Adan is not good. That is not a parliament that carries the credibility of the watchdog of people's interest. But what does that mean? Institutions like public media should start playing a larger role, lest you forget. You are reopening a road that was opened by Uhuru, lest you forget. There are these challenges that require resources much more than you flying around with large armies of supporters.
It's all about accountability coming from the people. Yes. We thank you very much, Dr. Mukhisa Kituyi, for joining us for those 2 hours and the conversation and shedding light on, what this all could mean, and also going forward. We'll invite you again, if you don't mind.
Okay, thank you very
for
much.
Other conversations.
Most welcome, and thank you very much, listeners.
Dr. Mukhisa Kituyi is a senior citizen. That's what he calls himself. He's been a politician. He's been in the leadership of the country. He's been in the leadership at the United Nations. What is it? Conference on Trade and Development, right? And he has done very many things. We have been talking about the impact of the global aid freeze coming from USAID and other activities and decisions of US President Donald Trump. In our next hour, we talk about gambling and the effect that is having on our youth, not just the youth, but on people across all its sectors in our society. We will be joined by Steve Giro, who is here already in the studio. He'll be telling us, first of all, his own experience with gambling and what he has seen in his community and what he's doing about it. He is here next. It's 9:02. Good morning.